Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us today at the DESA Forest event. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Tina Bahanen on behalf of the Collaborative Partnership on Forest.
Thank you, Rio. It's my pleasure to be a moderator of this event. And the event is realizing forest-based climate actions, global forest goals, SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. We are here to showcase how forest-based solutions can contribute to coherent implementation of these many agendas, including the UN Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. We have two segments for this. We have first a high-level segment where we will hear opening remarks and a keynote speech. And then after that, we will continue in a form of a panel that is composed of a number of members of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. So, with that brief introduction, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Liu Chengmin, the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, to provide his keynote address.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to join you at this important event entitled Realizing Forest-Based Climate Actions, Global Forest Goals, SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. One of the long-standing roles of the United Nations is to bring countries together to address global challenges. The sustainability of our planet in the face of the ever-increasing impacts of climate change is one such challenge. We must address this challenge without any further delay. This event is being organized at a time when forests are in the spotlight. They are in the mainstream news on spotlight arenas and across and beyond the UN system. Forests are essential in developing solutions, in mitigating and adapting to climate change. These terrestrial ecosystems have already removed nearly 1/3 of human-produced CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. And through sustainable forest management, they could remove much more. Together, forests and sustainable agriculture have significant influence in mitigating climate change. They could get us at least a quarter of the way to meeting the goal of limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade under the Paris Agreement. Forests cover 30% of all the land on our planet. They contribute to the livelihood of over 1/5 of the world population. They represent a safety net for both rural and urban poor in many developing countries, by providing them with the goods and services, such as water, food, medicine, construction materials, and jobs. Forests and the solutions they offer are thus critical to accelerating achievement of the SDGs and addressing climate change. Distinguished participants, today there is no doubt that deforestation is a significant contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. There is also no doubt that improving sustainable forest management is a key part of the climate solution, as a mitigation strategy and as an adaptation mechanism. At the Climate Action Summit convened by the Secretary General last September in New York, more than 150 nature-based solutions to cut carbon emissions were announced, many of them involving forests. Many countries around the world made major commitments to plant more than 11 billion trees. And at the SDG Summit, there was a growing recognition of the importance of forests and other nature-based solutions in advancing progress towards the goals. A decade of action to deliver the SDGs by 2030 was launched, and world leaders announced more than 100 acceleration actions, including 26 actions that are directly related to SDGs 15 on life and land. Dear colleagues, since 2015, the United Nations Forum on Forests has made consistent efforts to elevate the significance of forests in the global policy agenda. It continues to promote implementation of the 2030 agenda through forest action. Based on the proposal of the UN Forum on Forests, the first ever United Nations Strategic Plan Act for Forests 2030 was adopted by the UN General Assembly in April 2017. This plan, with its global forest goals and associated targets, provides an integrated framework of actions across the UN system and beyond. These actions aim to unlock the potential of forests to address climate change and accelerate achievement of the SDGs. Distinguished delegates, in order to achieve these goals, we will also need to enhance our support to meet the capacity building needs of the developing countries. To this end, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the UN DESA, is working with the member states to strengthen their capabilities to tackle climate change through various means, including forest financing. In this regard, the achievements of the UN Forum on Forests Global Forest Financing Facilitation Network are truly noteworthy. This network is supporting countries to strengthen their capacity to mobilize funding from all sources for sustainable forest management. This includes by providing technical assistance and facilitating their access to information and data related to forest funding opportunities. The Collaborative Partnership on Forests, CPEF, has also played an important essential role. Today, we are joined at this event by several of the partners from the CPEF. They will share their experiences to support sustainable forest management and to mitigate and adapt to climate change. From my side, UN DESA remains strongly committed to supporting the implementation of the UN Strategic Plan for Forests 2030 and the Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda. We look forward to your innovative ideas and guidance on how we can work together to strengthen sustainable forest management. Together, let us advance achievement of the SDGs through forest-based actions towards a carbon-positive future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen-Min. Mr. Chen-Min, the Under-Secretary General of the UN Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, for a very strong and powerful keynote address. I would now like to call for the opening remarks Ms. Maria Helena Semedo. She is the Deputy Director General for Climate and Natural Resources in FAO, and she oversees the cross-cutting work of climate change and biodiversity in FAO, in addition to the technical departments that deal with agriculture, forestry and fisheries. Ms. Semedo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tina, and good afternoon to all. Mr. Liu, Under-Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, guests, friends, colleagues, good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank UN DESA, Under-Secretary General Liu, and colleagues from UNFF Secretariat for providing us an opportunity to address together the key role that collaboration plays in realizing forest-based climate action for the achievement of the global climate goals. In September this year, Mr. Liu has already referred, the Climate Action Summit, convened by the United Nations Secretary General, brought a new moment to nature-based solutions for sustainable development and climate. outcome, the Nature-Based Solution Manifesto was launched. It emphasized the need for increased ambition, in addition to the new source of finance. Nature-based solutions are crucial, not only because they can deliver up to 1/3 of the reduction needed in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, but also because they have benefits that go beyond climate action. And I mentioned strengthening food production, the resilience of local communities, and conserving biodiversity. FAO is committed to support action on the ground. More than 60 tropical countries are engaged to deliver emission reduction, addressing drivers of deforestation and degradation. Technology and innovation are a gateway to increase action. For example, FAO has developed a set of monitoring tools currently being used globally, which allow for easy and free access to satellite image and supercomputer powers, thereby allowing users to create key forest and land cover data, even from a mobile phone. You can say that they are faster and also more cost-effective than ever before. Ladies and gentlemen, now, 12 years after the agreement by UNFCCC on the concept of REDD+, which started as a mere aspirational concept, there is evidence on REDD+ results. So far, 7 countries have reported emission reduction to UNFCCC, representing 8.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide. This is more than the annual fossil fuel emission of the United States and India combined. And countries are now assessing REDD+ results-based payment, rewards for their emission reduction. Chile's efforts, for instance, have been rewarded with $63 million from the Green Climate Fund. Today, this afternoon, we will be signing the agreement between FAO, Chile, and the Green Climate Fund. And FAO is very proud to be Chile's partner and accredited entity in this endeavor. The fund will support the investment in forests and communities. Forecasts indicate that reducing deforestation and forest degradation can contribute to cutting emissions for over 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year, which is about 10% of the total emission in 2018. The successful implementation of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals will largely depend on the decision we take in scaling up solutions to realize our long-term ambitions related to global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. FAO is committed to continue to strengthen its effort to support countries to take action. And we are committed to strengthen our partnerships, such as the UN REDD program that we operate together with UNDP. The upcoming UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, 2021-2030, is another partnership effort co-led by FAO and UNEP, which aims to prevent, halt, and reverse ecosystem degradation, including but not limited to forest ecosystem. In all of our ambition goals, collaboration is key. Collaborative Partnership on Forests, CPF, an alliance of 15 international organizations, is working to enhance the contribution of forests and trees outside forests to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, United Nations Strategic Plan for Forests, and Mr. Liu how it will be implemented. CPF has close 20 years of history and has grown into being a major partner of member states and found is privileged to share these partnerships. Through the CPF newest initiative on green finance for sustainable landscape, we seek to engage the financial sector in the transformation process towards low carbon and sustainable economies. The work of CPF is not static. It evolves as challenge too. To keep this evolution focused and effective, the partnership is developing a strategic vision towards 2030 to be adopted in January 2020 and presented to the 15th session of UNFF in May next year. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, we need to continue to work together within the CPF. As nature-based solutions, including forests, have the potential to provide 1/3 of the cost-effective climate mitigation needed between now and 2030 to stabilize warming below 2 degrees. I look forward to a fruitful and engaging discussion today, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Medo, Vice Deputy Director General for Climate Change, for Climate and Environment, Natural Resources. And thank you for the very concrete examples of the encouraging progress that have been made by many countries with our support, the support of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. We will now move to the second stage of this program, which will be a panel that represents a number of members of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. And I would like to invite the panelists to come here in front. So we have Mr. Gerhard Dieterle, Executive Director of ITTO. We have Martin Frick, Senior Director for Policy and Program Coordination, UNFCCC Secretariat. We have Michael Klein, Deputy Executive Director of the UPRO. And we have Kimberly Todd, Advisor from UNDP and UNFCCC Program. Let me move to this side, so not to stand in the booth. And Mr. Shamin, Ms. Semedo, I know it's your busy schedule. Should you wish to stay, you would be most welcome. But we now move to the second stage of this program. This is the panels. Thank you very much. So, dear panelists, dear colleagues, I think basically among us, we are old friends and good friends. We have been working together several years under the Collaborative Partnership on Forest and many other initiatives that were mentioned already in the opening remarks and the keynote remarks. We have a few questions, and maybe Rio can put those questions on the screen. I don't know where Rio went. Rio is. Could you, Rio, put those questions on the screen, because we have some questions to all of you panelists. We have come up with the 3 particular questions, and they are how can forest-based climate solutions be applied, replicated, and upscaled to accelerate progress in the Paris Agreement, in SDG 13 and SDG 15 and Global Forest Goals. And the second question is, how are the activities of the members of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests collectively and by individual members contributing to the achievement of the Paris Agreement and the SDG 15 and the Global Forest Goals? And the third question is, what measures can be taken to strengthen the involvement and contribution of partners that are not members of the CPF and stakeholders in advancing the progress towards the achievement of these goals? So the panelists, you're free to speak to one or two or all of these three questions, but speaking from the perspective and experience and progress that has going on in your own organization, and how do you see what needs to be done more in terms of accelerating real action on the ground and the implementation of all these political commitments and goals and objectives that have been created. I would like to start with Gerhard Dieterle. So Gerhard, Executive Director, International Tropical Timber Organization. So Gerhard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you today, and we feel very honored to be a partner of the CPF and to work in partnership with other members, because I think one thing is clear: none of our organizations can solve the problems alone. So we need to work together. And the national organization based in Japan, with its objective to promote trade with timber and timber products from sustainably managed forests and legally traded timber supply chains and so on. I would like to bring all the questions together in some short slides, because I think numbers are important. So, as a starting point, have a look at this slide. This is the population development until 2100. And if you look at Africa, for example, we have now roughly 1.3 billion people, and at the end of the century we will have 4.6 billion people. So in 80 years, 3 billion people in one continent more. That is a challenge for in any regard, for development, for poverty alleviation, for food security, and so on. And I would like to make the case that 3 billion people and the whole population, which goes to up to 12 billion at the end of the century, people do not need to have only more food and livelihoods. They need also, in the same correlation of about 90%, 99%, to have more wood products for housing, for construction, for furniture, for toilet paper, for household energy, and so on. And 3 billion more people have an additional pressure on forests, and we see that pressure is already visible on these slides. And the red color shows where we have deforestation and especially degradation issues. And degradation, as you see, is around the big forest massifs in the Amazon, in the Congo Basin, and so on. And it is, of course, food and agriculture is one of the factors, but many things are also going on in the forest. And I think the big question is what is going on in the forest. Is it already a reaction of forests to climate change? What we hear from Gabon, for example, that the capacity of regeneration has been reduced by 20% already? Or is it also the pressure of populations into the forests? More use, more demand for local products and so on. And I guess it could be both of them already. As we see already in the forest fires in Brazil, which are clearly correlated to climate change patterns, temperature increase, drought, and so on. And I think that the conclusion of this is, if we want to maintain our forests and to fulfill the demand of growing populations, we need to have to produce more. We need to supply these forests, otherwise we will lose all of them, including protected areas. And I think we also need to look at the quality of forests, the adaptation to climate change. And as we see in Europe, for example, and in the Nordic countries, where the attack of bark beetles and fire and so on is demanding a considerable change of how we look at silviculture and things like that. But this is... I made a mistake. I would like to show you this slide. I think this is a very important slide which came out from IPCC this year, and it says basically that not only the forest as such is important for mitigation climate change, it is the forest and the forest products, because as you see on the second bullet, if harvested wood products, they can store carbon in furniture and so on, in buildings, but they can substitute for carbon, for non-renewable materials and energy, and that is a scale which we have underestimated so far. And this slide shows this exactly this case which we have in several case countries. And the grey bar is what comes of the afterlife of a tree, the forest products. And you see, for example, in Vietnam and Mexico and everywhere, the substitution effect is bigger than what you can do in the forests itself. And if we want to address these issues, we need to produce more forests and better forests. And our analysis is that it has to be coming from the landscape restoration, reforestation, in different ways, from plantations, but also to enrichment and so on, but also from agroforestry. But the key is that we need to look at integrated supply chains. If we want to make the substitution an element of climate change mitigation, this can only be realized if the products come from sustainably managed forests and from legal supply chain which connects the forest to the market. And this is an enormously complicated task. So if you look at the contribution of forests to SDGs and the global forest goals, it's an overwhelmingly positive story. It is a convincing case because we can go from 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 and 15 and so on of the SDGs easily. But if we don't do that, the cost of inaction would be disastrous, especially for developing countries. Because in our northern societies, people tend to say, oh, tropical timber is a dirty product, but in not using those sustainable products from that area, we deprive people from development and from jobs and from income, and we see already the results through migration and conflict and so on. So we talk about legal and sustainable supply chains, and this is the core of our mandate at ITTO. And just this slide shows that it is a complicated issue to be addressed from the producer in the forest to the consumer on the markets. And there are many elements which need to be in place. We need to have incentives, fiscal incentives, macroeconomic regulations. We need to have good governance. We need to have land rights. We have to have access to information and planning and integrated tools, which have been highlighted by Madame Zemeda. But what I think is needed among the most is knowledge, capacity building, training, because many people in the forest, they do not know what is a management plan, how to calculate extraction, how to document and things like that. And so this is what we are trying to do in our 3 programmatic lines, which we have been approved just last week. Legal and sustainable supply chains, biodiversity and ecosystem services, landscape restoration, and livelihoods. And only at the end, one example is a recent conference in Shanghai, which was initiated by the private sector. The biggest Chinese companies have said, let's work together, let's create a platform for green supply chains, because we want to serve tropical products in the long run to European, the US and Chinese and whatever markets. And we have now had 400 companies and forest actors there in China, and we create this global platform as a contribution, as a priority from ITTO, where we can have exchange of information, where we capacities, but also where business-to-business activities can go on, because a producer in the tropical country doesn't know necessarily where he's a buyer for certified good, and vice versa, and so on. And I think with that, this slide shows the supply chain and the many SDGs we can tackle up, and so we want to work with our partners, for example, with FAO, UFRO, and C4, and so on a new initiative, Sustainable Food for a Sustainable World, and we need to have funding at scale for that, and I think this is something we want to actively promote here at this conference and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. I think it was really important that you highlighted the role of forest degradation in climate mitigation, and not that we should not be talking about deforestation, but the sort of the importance of the degradation, and then of course the flip side of the forest restoration, and also the role of the harvested wood products. That's probably now that the IPCC has recognized it clearly, will also be more on the limelight, I would say, in our climate mitigation actions. And obviously very interesting to hear the role of the private sector that you described, this initiative of the Chinese private sector suppliers to basically work towards green supply chains. So the next one, Martin Frick, Senior Director for Policy and Program Coordination from the UNFCCC Secretariat. Martin, your views on coherent agenda between SDGs and Paris Agreement, and any other developments you would like to share?
Thank you very much, Tina, and I hope you can all hear me. It's quite loud around. If not, just raise your hand and I say it again. The connection between all of that and the question in this conference has been all the time, so how on earth do we make it happen? If we know what's going on, if we have the tool, if we have so convincing cases like the one you just made, what is holding us back? And I come more and more to the recognition that what is holding us back is the sheer complexity of the issue and the fact that everyone needs to talk to everyone, and that is just so difficult to make. You just made this example of surrogating steel in construction by wood. So the building people would basically look at the statics, the forestry people would look at the wood supply, the climate people would look at the carbon content, and every single one would miss the full picture because we would just focus on one specific one. So I think the biggest driver of really making this happen, if I look at the Paris Agreement, are the nationally determined contributions. And we know the first set of them have been done in a hurry. That's an open secret. And while so many of the NDCs have mentioned the forestry sector and the land use sector, very few of them, to be honest, really have a detailed plan laid out. And that was just not possible in this time. So I think for me, one of the key drivers would be if we can really engage in national discussions around the NDCs, if we get every single minister and every single ministry involved in that, and even more important, that we get all of society listening to these points. So we need foresters to speak about the NDCs and the potential here. We need people who basically translate general political statements like we want to reduce our emissions from deforestation into tangible targets. You need to break these targets down in regions and ultimately in landscapes. And it's in these landscapes that if you include the local population, if you give them a voice, if you balance out, and you alluded to that, the interests of the planet, the interests of reducing carbon, but also the vital interests of people just to live and have a livelihood, then this is exactly where SDGs and climate come together, and where we will, in both logics, only come to a solution if we can really have this combination. And one last sentence, and I'm sticking my neck out a little bit here, but if you look at governments, those who have a lot of money have a tendency to be close to the government. And this is still until today the grey economy, because the oil, the coal, the gas companies, they have the ear of the government. So our main job here is really to give those who don't have the ear of the government a giant megaphone, so they can shout until somebody finally is listening, and I think that is what we need now.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, let's build that megaphone. I think it's really needed and timely. And also, you know, there's no reason that we are held back. Even though there is a complexity, as you said, but we need to really overcome those things. And as you said, that something that should be done very urgently now, and countries are fully aware of this, is really to clarify and raise the ambition in their NDCs and really quantify these commitments so that they are really tangible. And also the role of the local communities where the action happens on the ground, very, very important. So next, Michael Klein. Michael is the Deputy Executive Director from the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, UFRO. So Michael, your thoughts on this complexity and how can science make it easier to understand to us, right?
Yes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Tina, thank you very much for the invitation to UFRO to speak in front of you and also to participate in this panel discussion. You know, UFRO is the largest global network for the science cooperation, and we are active in 127 countries and having 650 member organizations. So scientists in UFRO, of course, know the local level, the local context, and they have worked for decades in that field and would be a very good source for information and for collaboration. But I've taken that realizing forest-based climate action a little bit to find out the role of science. The role of science, of course, is always to have a critical look at the issues, not only the biophysical, but also the social issues. And it's our obligation in the discussion, in political discussions, but also in technical discussions, somehow to bring the truth to the table, which actually is the very, very purpose of a scientist, to find out what is reality. And then that action, policies and investments can actually be directed also and help to direct it in the right direction. Therefore, I just recap, what do we know? I mean, we know that our world is rapidly warming, climate change impacts are already felt around the world. I don't have to tell you, we all know this, from personal examples and from our studies and for our work we are doing. We cannot keep warming below 2 degrees without land sector contribution, which we also know. By 2100, there must even be removals of the current CO2 levels in the atmosphere, otherwise that kind of 1.5 or even 2.2 and 1.5 target cannot be achieved. So there must be negative emissions are required later in the century. But expectations, and I think we have heard a little bit about this, expectations are very high that the forest sector will contribute these or parts of these contributions and these removals. Of course, now the question, of course, is will the land-based sector and forest and trees in whatever form be able to do these removals which we hope for? And here latest research and evidence shows, of course, that there is quite some impact already of climate change, ongoing climate change on forests. For example, there are examples where growth rates increase in some areas, but there are many areas also where the growth rates of trees decrease. The decrease of growth rates is not a very good message, because our models, which have developed from the past, do not apply in that particular area for the future. We know that mortality rates increase because of drought, because of heat waves. So trees are dying earlier, and they are contributing to biomass decomposition, so the decomposition is faster, which again releases carbon. So the net sequestration from forest would be then lower as expected. It's not a good news. We will have definitely a shift in species and even in vegetation zones. Some of the species will move up to the mountains, higher up, because it becomes warmer. So we have actually examples where species which in the last 500 years worked well on that side will not so well anymore work under the new climate system which we actually face now. And of course, you all know, you have experienced yourself and seen this on television, those disturbances. Fires from Brazil to California to Australia to Greece and Portugal. You have bark beetle attacks, the lowland forest in Germany, where spruce forests are in large quantities, which has never been seen in Germany and even in Austria, in my own country, actually are dying now prematurely, providing now a lot of source for the timber industry, but after 20 years there will be a lack of logs for the timber industry. So there are already impacts which we need to monitor to be sure that the role the land-based sector should play in renewables can be played also. Now, realizing forest-based climate actions actually would lead us to the following conclusions. First of all, I think we should not stop in recognizing the limitations of the forest sector. And I think we have heard this already today, and I'm very grateful for that. Other sectors must, particularly those fossil fuel and energy sectors, must realize forest and land-based systems, vegetation, cannot be the remedy for not reducing. They need to reduce, according to the Paris Agreement, almost down to zero. And if this doesn't happen, the climate changes in the way that even the land, the forest cannot uptake what is needed. Secondly, we need to build resilient forests. That means forests which survive, not forests which are dying after 10, 15 years. So trees who are becoming mature, who can be used for sustainable management, who can be used as construction timber, but also can be conserved to become more or less primary forest trees for a lot of carbon stocks. We need to support on the ground implementation informed by local knowledge. This was mentioned already. With the local people, with local scientists who know their own situation best, of course with the local socio-economic context. And of course, continuously monitor the based on robust scientific knowledge. And here, of course, the science community would be stand by to help all those partners to bring this information, the monitoring, and the new data on board. I don't want to put a too negative view into that, but I would like to have a snapshot that we are alert and that we know it is not taken for granted that the forest is the remedy for everything, so the others should also help that this forest survive. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. I think this is a very powerful message of that while we all believe that forestry can provide the one main solution or among the main solutions, but we also have limitations and certainly cannot think that we should not reduce the emissions from the fossil fuels. And also your alert to the damage, as we all know, in forests, but also people's livelihoods and all our lives is visible, it's tangible, and we really need to move now. And also the past models don't work, we need to come up with the new ones to actually make sure that the forest can provide the mitigation and adaptation contributions, but also the contributions that they do for economic purposes and social purposes. So then we move to UNDP, Kimberly Dott. Kimberly is advisor at the UN Development Program, UNDP, and she also works for the UN RED program. So Kimberly, your views on these questions about what are the solutions from forests, how they work, how they can be applied, replicated, and how can we do more together, and also I would imagine you touch also about the stakeholder engagement as well. So Kimberly, your turn.
Great. Thank you, Tina. Thank you to colleagues at the UN Forum on Forests for the invitation to join the panel. Appreciate the opportunity. So we've heard several times about the important potential of these forest-based climate solutions, right? Not only the massive climate mitigation potential, but all of the co-benefits, the other goals that can be met in terms of food security and water and biodiversity. So it's very clear that there's a critical need to continue to accelerate, replicate, upscale, all of these verbs we like to use to get these really going on a larger scale. And they need to be scaled up, accelerated, and supported not only by governments but non-state actors as well. So as Martin had already pointed out, I think the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, and particularly this next round of NDCs in 2020 provides an excellent moment to provide this opportunity for this upscaling and acceleration of progress, and will allow us to not only meet the Paris Agreement goals, but also the SDGs and the global forest goals as we're talking about here. So to inform acceleration in this regard, and what could be done to progress in the next round of NDCs, UNFCCC and UNDP had produced a report together that came out earlier this year along the sidelines of the climate summit called The Heat Is On, the Global NDC Outlook Report. And in that, it captured this combination of gathering information from countries directly on their experiences with NDC implementation thus far, and their plans to enhance NDCs going forward to try to capture some lessons learned, right? What's working, what's not, and then how can we do better? And of course, this applies more broadly than the forest sector, but certainly applicable to the forest-based climate solutions. So as part of that analysis, countries came forward with a number of bottlenecks to NDC implementation, and also highlighted a variety of successes or opportunities to sort of break through the barriers. So some of the bottlenecks were challenges at assessing the costs of different options, and accessing finance, of course, limited institutional capacity, lack of engagement of key ministries, limited access to reliable data, certainly an issue in the broader space of nature-based solutions, and lack of political will. But then they highlighted this, on the positive side, highlighted a variety of things that are working to overcome barriers, right? So strengthening policy and regulatory frameworks, more structured processes of engagement. So again, on that stakeholder question, bringing in the private sector and citizen engagement, and mainstreaming of the NDC targets into their overall plans, policies, and budgets. And that's when you get into meeting these broader sets of development goals, other goals that the country may have. So these were very useful insights, and this was actually used to inform the design of UNDP's climate promise. So this is UNDP's pledge to support countries to enhance their NDCs, to support 100 countries to enhance them in 2020, and this is being done in partnership within the context of the NDC partnership, well coordinated with partners within that context to bring countries support on the NDCs. So this is a great space by which, within which we can really realize the potential of forest-based climate solutions. So, and just to mention maybe some of the key sort of service areas around this NDC enhancement that may point to sort of solution areas for accelerating work in the forest space. So building political will and societal ownership at both the national and subnational level. Another one, which is key when we're looking across these goals and across various agreements and commitments and goals that countries have set, is looking at the existing targets and policies and measures that a country may be progressing with under these various structures, and trying to review and align them. So is there anything in the biodiversity reporting that can be considered in the climate change context, in the NDC, in the content of the NDC, and that elaborating that Martin mentioned before, incorporating new sectors or greenhouse gases, assessing investment opportunities, and monitoring and strengthening transparency, so the reporting aspect, which is key. So that's on the first. And then I just wanted to say something on the second question on the activities of the CPF and sort of the collaborative, the strength of the partnership across our member organizations. So I think, the CPF member organizations are really supporting countries on concrete actions in this space, in the climate and forest space, and meeting these broader goals. As a specific example, which was already mentioned today, we have several CPF partners, FAO, UNDP, and UN Environment, as part of the UN RED program partnership. So this was the first UN partnership bringing together 3 CPF partners to deliver on a joint UN system response in response to the climate emergency and to advance the sustainable development agenda. So UN RED, we've heard a bit about what we've been doing in general, but supporting partner countries on progressing nature-based solutions through forest planning and actions at regional, national, jurisdictional levels, and really seeking to be a catalyst and accelerator of transformation in the forest sector since 2008. And then another key, which was one of our key questions, is the interagency and multi-stakeholder approach under UN RED, and how we aim to be a convener and catalyst of action, bringing in those various groups of stakeholders. And I think there are some useful lessons there. And then I would say under CPF, we have a number of joint initiatives that various groups of CPF partners are working on, right? And certainly the hope is, and I think we're already seeing how this can bring lessons, influence, provide guidance into this process of advancing climate, forest-based solutions in the climate space. So we have this joint initiative that a number of the CPF partners are working on forest and landscape restoration, and looking at mainstreaming forest and landscape restoration into the NDC and broader development goals. So finally, maybe just a bit more on the stakeholder question. Multi-stakeholder action is certainly needed at the various scales. So, at the global scale, through these coalitions and platforms and programs, but at the national as well as subnational scales. So this is key. So some measures we think that can be taken at these various scales to enhance multi-stakeholder involvement in the acceleration of these climate forest solutions are further cooperation between donors, companies, and governments, expansion of capacity development, completing institutional, legal, and policy frameworks that really allow this cross-sectoral implementation, that recognize that the drivers of deforestation and degradation and so on are happening across sectors, and everyone needs to be brought to the table. Catalyzing new and additional finance, and really expanding the participation of relevant stakeholders, particularly indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as the private sector. And maybe a concrete example, coming back to UN RED again. One example is a promotion of equal rights. In the Vietnam case, there was promotion of equal rights among men and women, as well as vulnerable communities, by supporting partnerships for forest-based economic models between women and men from ethnic minorities and private companies. So this was a really good example of bringing those various stakeholder groups together. And they were brought together in the context of traditional herbal medicine products, fostering sustainable management of forests, but then also empowering the communities to enhance their livelihoods and in terms of income and access to markets. So again, that's the type of convening that's needed, right? Bring all these actors together to really advance these solutions.
Thank you, Kimberly. So, answers to all of the questions that we posed. And not that I'm trying to summarize all that, but I think it was important that you mentioned the role of the non-state stakeholders, particularly the private sector, citizens. The city's agenda is growing, and our interest here, you can see it here clearly in the COP25, and obviously the local stakeholders, and also the example of how the ethnic minority groups have been able to be brought into the decision-making process in Vietnam. Many other examples that you mentioned. So we've gone through our introductory remarks from our panelists, and I would like to open the floor now for some questions from the audience. So, do we have questions? Yes, please do, and introduce yourself.
So I'm Preeti Sinha. I'm an advisor to C4 Craft, and I'm also a banker by training. So let me bring some finance into forest. Two main ways would be carbon and would be the sustainable forest management. So question to Martin, this week obviously I've been to all the RED events. So there's been the art and the emerging climate, there's been RED Plus yesterday. So question, how are you finding obviously the RED process and the verification? Is the timeline, good? What do you think about all these initiatives coming up? And also somebody like Ghana said, we'd love to have like 50 million in a reserve fund for us to first plant the trees and then get, deforestation sort of carbon credits. And to the other half, then how do you balance the sustainable forest management with the timber needs? So any views on that? Obviously, there are many models, but I'd love to hear if you have some views.
Okay, maybe we start with Martin on the RED Plus on the agenda and the timeliness.
Yeah, I hope I fully understood the question. There's a lot of noise going into my right ear. RED Plus is certainly a success story. It took some time to complete. The framework is there. It's working. Countries are getting payments. We see the number of countries being interested going up. Chile is a wonderful example. Our presidency for this year is doing excellent work. Now it's a question of pumping a lot of money into it. And if I still see that out of a promised 100 billion a year, we are now having 10 billion in the Green Climate Fund roughly, it just needs scaling up. It needs more money and it needs a broader understanding that this is really delivering the services we want to have, and that there's a mechanism in which what we are negotiating with Article 6 is basically in that specific area already sorted out. But I would suggest, Tina knows a lot about RED Plus, that our moderator is also allowed to intervene on that point.
Yeah, I stay as a moderator, but we have a colleague from the UN RED program. Kimberly, do you want to just say a few words on the sort of timeliness of the progress in RED overall?
Sure. Great question. I think, yes, we spent many years on sort of the readiness process, right? The capacity building, and it may have taken longer than we expected, maybe in the initial days of negotiating the overall framework. But I think that was critical, right? You have to get those platforms we discussed up and running. You have to have them be inclusive, the data, confidence in the data, and so on, and the reporting. And so now we've just really seen an explosion, right, in terms of countries being able to report and go through the UNFCCC process where they can actually report on the results and access the finance. We've seen that primarily through results-based finance, not yet the markets as much at this higher scale, but it's really interesting to see what's popping up in the market space and sort of piloting that concept and whether and how those market platforms and structures can work. So I think it's really interesting to keep an eye on that as we also see how Article 6 develops. There's a lot of uncertainty, and sort of just gather lessons and see how this piloting, this experimenting on the market side looks, and advance it, and hopefully it can provide additional sources and means to get these solutions scaled up as we're talking about here.
Thanks, Kimberly. And the second part of the question was addressed to you, Gerhard.
Of course, I think there are many ways and many solution areas, but let me say one thing about the RED Plus first. I think it has been an enormous effort to build up the methodology and so on, and we hope that more funding is coming in from carbon-based, performance-based payments and so on. But my feeling is that it always should be an addition to the basic economics in the forest, because we cannot replace normal forest management through carbon-based finance. I think that the amount are not sufficient for that, but it is in certain areas it's a very important element. And I look here especially at areas where we need to have the conservation aspect in the front, protected areas, high biodiversity areas, and things like that, where local communities and local stakeholders have to make a step back, and where other functions are being rewarded. Another element is the role of local populations and local communities and private sector. I come just this weekend from Togo, West Africa, and what we see there is a spontaneous willingness of the upcoming middle class to plant a hectare here, 5 hectares there, and so on. And in areas with, let's say, teak or other tree species which can be sold on the markets and so on. The point is that these spontaneous plantations, which is already now bigger than the state forests, they are not connected. So to connect these local actors in user associations, in producer associations, in marketing associations, so to scale up and to get a better price or have value-added production in the country and not export this teak to India where all the value-added is made, I think that would be an enormous incentive in many countries to build a local economy. And I think the issue which we have in many of these countries now in the developing world is that if we look at fuel wood, charcoal, these are perfect supply chains, except they are not legal, whatever, yeah? Or they are informal. But if you could use those existing supply chains from the forest to the market in a way that the source is legal and sustainable, I think that would be an enormous benefit for the countries. Tanzania, for example, the fuel wood market is $100 million. It's a huge share in the economy and so on. And then the next thing is the role of consumers in Europe, in US, in developed countries. Because we believe that this concession management and international trade has been pushed always from behind, that we try to convince forest producers to do more sustainable management, then you may sell this on the market. But I think what we see now, especially the Chinese companies, they say we want to become legal and sustainable suppliers for these high-end markets. So the demand for more sustainability is coming from the consumers and not from the producers. And I think that's another strong element. The fourth element is the growing markets domestically in many countries in the tropics. If you look at 3 billion people more in Africa, there is a huge opportunity for business, and we see already that investments for the domestic markets are a good business proposition. The fact there is that many shy away from the risk because of the land tenure, from governance issues and things like that. And so to address this issue of sustainability and the contribution to SDGs has to be done from many ends and not from, there's no one solution. And Red Plus is one of an important element to finance a part of the equation, but not all.
Okay, thank you, Gerhard, and thank you for the question, and also just for the note for the audience that ICRAF and C4 are also members of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. Any other questions? I see 2 hands that were raised simultaneous. Rio, did you capture those? There's a gentleman here, and then...
Hi, Robert Brown, balance between carbons in agricultural soils and forestry soils, and pre-assessment of carbon levels before you actually plant a forest. I've got an Australian figure here, 2 to 39 tonnes of carbon per hectare in the top 30 centimetres. So if you're planting forest in a carbon-rich soil, you could be abstracting carbon from the soil and end up with a net deficit. Do we need more nuanced measurement of information?
Hey. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, do we need more nuanced measurement and information in determining carbon benefits or disbenefits? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is very down to the point to give answers to that. What is now the net effect in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, so removals from the atmosphere? Of course, we need a full IPCC MRV, which has all land uses, doesn't measure forests separately, measure agriculture, so across the landscape, with all those emission figures because of soil working, because of sequestration of measures. And this brought me to another point which I would like to make here, that there is an MRV system since many years established for each country. So from the IPCC, so countries are obliged to report and provide their biannual reports plus repeated remeasurements. So I think for many of the questions actually, including this one, much fewer information actually has been taken out from these reports. They of course are submitted to the UNFCCC, but many of the questions actually should be answered from there. But strengthening this IPCC reporting MRV across the country, because there you have the land use change, LULUCF, then you have the individual assessments for the soil up to the above ground biomass, everything is there. So one should utilize these results and then to see whether sustainable forest management or even reforestation or landscape restoration in whatever form should be implemented to avoid exactly what you actually just mentioned, the example.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And there's the next question over there.
Fiona Ryan from Cairns Climate Action Network. We're a regional group in Australia. I've heard a lot about RED, and I'm a bit confused by what RED Plus is. You know, is it the Warsaw framework that came out, or is it all this other stuff that people talk about? I assume with the Warsaw framework, there's an independent review process coming through, whereas the other stuff there doesn't seem to be, except maybe through the MRV system, which really depends on what you're measuring, whether you can measure it accurately. Like soils are hard to measure. When they talk about RED, are they all these other projects that keep coming out? Because I don't think that this forest degradation isn't in the Warsaw framework, as far as I can tell. Either is reforestation, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Okay, I think Kimberly, that's for you.
Sure. Okay, great question, because the term is used more broadly. So in the UN RED program and the work that the UN does supporting RED Plus, so RED Plus is voluntary, and there's a broad scope, and countries can choose what within that scope they look at. So it includes reducing deforestation, reducing forest degradation. It does include enhancement of carbon stocks as well as conservation. So there's a broad scope there. The idea is that a country should aim to be as comprehensive as possible, but sort of has can build over time. And typically what we've seen in most countries, right, usually starting with addressing reducing the deforestation, and then sometimes we see the expansion of scope into the enhancement side, and so on. And in the context of the Warsaw Framework, we're talking about subnational or national. So subnational in the interim, but ultimately that we're talking about scaling up to a national level approach, national level accounting and MRV. Of course, there are in the carbon markets. There's what's called RED Plus, operating at various scales, and there are various methodologies. But when we talk about RED Plus, it's within the UNFCCC context, and at that scale, and being consistent with the Warsaw Framework.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Any other questions? If I don't see the questions on the audience, maybe we do just a quick wrap up. 1-minute elevator talk, what would be your key message to the audience, building on what you yourself have said, but also what you've heard from the audience? So, what we should do to enhance forest-based solutions to climate change mitigation or adaptation? Martin, will you start?
Well, very fast. All of you are interested in it, obviously, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. All of you are coming from very different nations, so if you go back home, keep it in mind. Be loud and push for integration of that in your nationally determined contribution. And if there is not an opening, keep knocking at the door until there is one.
Gerhard.
Yeah, I would say a short formula is no climate action without development action, and no development action without climate. I think it's so narrowly correlated that what we do in climate action, it has to have a purpose for the benefit of people, for biodiversity, for water, and so on. And so I think that would be my key message. And I would just like to say that we are currently revising our global forest landscape restoration guidelines to bring these aspects in the economic analysis and elements in it to the forefront, because otherwise, why we have degraded land? Because it didn't have an economic purpose, and it was gone. So I think to keep our landscape efforts alive, we need to make it sustainable for the future. Thank you.
Okay, Michael.
Well, from a science perspective, let me say one thing. Whatever land use you are involved in, be it forestry, be it agriculture, be it infrastructure, nature conservation, national parks, species conservation, important is not the carbon stocks, but watch out for the greenhouse gas balance of each individual area. If this is neutral or positive, that means removing, you're on the right track. And if you need help, science and your scientists of UFRO and other agriculture and forest scientists will be at your side in each of the countries we are working. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Kimberly.
Thank you. I think I'll just re-emphasize the point on partnerships and just to say the value and the importance of partnerships for success here. And so I think at the level of our organizations within the CPF, we'll continue to improve our efforts on partnership, and then the value at the national level on those platforms we talked about, engaging everyone, bringing everyone to the table, from indigenous peoples to private sector, how it's really key to accelerate these solutions.
Okay, thank you. I think the reason I asked the 1-minute question was to make my task easier, so I don't have to summarize, because you all did it very, very well with the very powerful messages. Just to conclude, I would like to really thank, first of all, the UNFF Secretariat, United Nations Forum of Forest Secretariat, from DESA to the hosting and organizing this event. I think it was very timely. And the second, I would like to thank very much all the panelists, Kimberly, Michael, Gerhard, Martin, for your very wise words to us. And I would like to thank everyone for participating. Thank you very much.